Our guest today is Chris Chinnock. He was one of our very first guests on SDVoE Live talking about 8K. Today he's here to talk about DirectView LED. Why don't we bring him on in? Chris, are you there?
I am here.
There we are. Well, hello, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, DirectView LED. First of all, you heard of these? You heard about this?
I have.
Excellent. I knew we got the right guy. So let's dive right in because I want to talk about the trends. I want to talk about a lot of things, and honestly, I don't think we'll get through it in the time we have. DirectView LEDs were built to be big, right? That was the idea. You know, I don't want 65-inch TVs. I want 65-meter TVs. And yet, the trend that I observe, just going to trade shows and walking around and seeing who's building things, is that they're getting smaller. So what's that about? Why are we trying to make them smaller when their job is to be big?
Well, actually, before we dive into that, maybe you talked a little bit about pixel pitch, which you are correct. But there's another factor to consider, and that's the size of the LED itself. So that size can vary greatly from millimeter sized or bigger down to micron sized. So there's a whole trend to talk about micro LEDs, mini LEDs that can be used in direct view signage and even in VR and AR headsets. So we'll come back to that.
Oh, really? Okay. So why try to make them smaller? Why do we want smaller LEDs? Why do we want smaller pitch?
Yeah. So, there's two things here. One, the smaller LEDs is a cost issue. That's less material you have to use in the LED. That helps bring down price. So there's a valid reason for wanting to make that LED size, the die itself, smaller. And then the pixel pitch itself, you want to make smaller because you can get closer to it now without seeing the pixels, right? So anything that's indoors that has relatively close viewing, you want to keep shrinking that pixel pitch. And again, pixel pitch and pixel size, LED size, are completely independent. You can have a 1 millimeter LED display that has, half millimeter LEDs or a tenth of a millimeter LEDs or 10 micron LEDs. It doesn't matter. It does matter, but they're independent somewhat.
Mm-hmm. I have to imagine that, let's say, all things being equal, and maybe they're not, and maybe that's what we'll talk about, but all things being equal, a smaller LED will have a smaller light output. Is that the case? And then the follow-up is, are all things equal, or is that about improving the process?
Yeah, they generally will be lower light output for the smaller ones. But actually, as you start to get really small, you can get to these tremendous outputs, especially when you're talking about VR and AR headsets that are, single microns or tens of microns big. We're talking about millions of nits of light output. It's crazy.
Whoa, wow. Let's talk about that because I hadn't even conceived it, and I wanted to talk about what applications are there for smaller DV LEDs, but I had no idea that you were going to say VR and AR. We're talking about panel sizes that are like an inch, right, or 2 inches. Is that? Am I picturing this right?
Yeah, absolutely, or smaller, absolutely. Yeah, so
And so,
you make projectors, right, with 3 panels, and it can be 3 LED sources, larger LED sources. Well, you can actually make little VR headsets that are like mini projectors with micro LEDs, red, green, and blue micro LEDs combined in a cube prism now.
is there any? Now I'm really just going off the rails here, but if you can build a panel that small and with that kind of light output, couldn't you, in theory, use that as the image source for a projector? Put a lens
Yep.
in front of it and beam that image onto a screen? And is anybody working on that?
You could. Well, yeah, they are people working on that for sure. The LED
Wow.
projectors that you have now are where they still use micro displays panels, but they have large area LEDs, basically the size of those panels. But you
Right. Those are
could
just light
potentially
sources, right?
go
Not
with a
image sources.
exactly, exactly. It's a light source, not
Yeah.
an image source. So you could potentially replace the image source in the panel with a pixelated micro LED with lenses and
Whoa.
projection optics, as you suggest. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm gonna hold on. Let me go patent. Matt, can you call the patent attorneys? Get this down. I'm sure this was an original idea I just had. Except Chris said that people are already working on it. That's fine. That's fine. Um, when I was thinking about smaller panels enabling new applications, I was thinking about, you know, 10-foot wide panels, 5-foot wide panels, not 2-inch wide panels. So talk to me about what applications are we opening up as we get to the 5 or 10-foot wide panel class?
Right. So what you're seeing is, the trend started, I think, in commercial to make smaller sizes, smaller pixel pitch, so you can be closer to them. And now we're kind of seeing this move into the high-end custom install space. So
Mm-hmm.
companies like Samsung have already commercialized a 110-inch display they call the Wall. It's both for
Uh-huh.
professional as well as high-end consumer. That's a single unit that would go into a luxury home. It costs about $150,000 or so. And they've announced plans to do smaller sizes. I think it's like 88 inch, 90 inch, 99 inch, somewhere in those range. Again, single units. These are basically big TVs that you bring into the house and are direct view. They're amazing.
So once you, I mean, 150 inches is an awfully nice size of big TV, but once you're talking 88 inches, you're now into the class of big flat panels. You know, just run down to Best Buy and pick up an 85-inch TV for 5,000
Yep.
bucks. I guess my question
Yep.
is, how much of a why would somebody buy a 90-inch direct view, let's say, instead of an OLED today? And if
Yep.
and how much of a threat is direct view to the OLEDs, to the traditional flat panels today and in the near 5-year future?
Right. So the value proposition of direct view LED, and I think ultimately this is going to be the display technology that everyone's going to want for every application almost. Um, it's brightness basically and color gamut. So
Mm-hmm.
so compared to an OLED TV, it will have very similar black levels. It will have probably a wider color gamut than an OLED panel, and it will have a more brightness than an OLED panel. That's one of the limitations of OLED is they have limited brightness. Great contrast, great black levels, good colors, somewhat limited brightness. I shouldn't say it's totally limited because it's plenty bright for most applications. But if you want to go super bright, then LED has an advantage.
Right. There's bright for your living room, and then there's bright for an outdoor football stadium. Those are two different kinds
There
of
you go.
bright.
Right.
You mentioned maybe a slightly wider color gamut. Is that just from a sort of manufacturability perspective? I can better control exactly which fundamental colors my LEDs are compared to my OLEDs, or what? Why would I get slightly better color gamut?
Well, it's both. You can control the wavelength of the LED more. You can pick what wavelengths you want, which
Yeah.
defines the points of the color gamut. But it also depends on the full width half maximum, the width of that emission, right? So LEDs have a fairly narrow emission, 30, 40
Okay.
microns, somewhere in that range. Um, OLEDs have a broader emission. So you can't go out to the extremes of the color gamut with a broader emission. So you can get
Right.
more deeply saturated colors with LED. And depending on where you place those, that means a larger color volume or color gamut.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, and go learn about color gamut in the SDVoE Academy, everybody. We've got some great courses on it in there. You've already touched on the answer to this question. I was going to ask, okay, so we can see the applications moving into the residential space. In the commercial AV space, the way I want to ask this is, are there any applications in commercial AV that that DV-LED might not dominate one day. It feels like, you know, if we can make them in any size we want, we haven't talked about shape yet, but we can sort of make them in any shape we want. They can be extremely high brightness. They can be extremely high contrast, high color. What can't they do? What other kinds of displays might survive?
Well, the separator is going to be cost. There's always
Yep.
LEDs are still expensive, so there's going to be plenty of applications where a lower cost solution with a little bit less image fidelity is going to suit the bill, right? I mean, projection mapping right now on buildings is a great application for projectors.
Right.
But if you go to, you're already seeing this now. In fact, I was just back from NAB, and on the Hilton Hotel, brand new hotel there, the whole side of the hotel is now LEDs. So
Wow.
there you have it. Projection mapping goes LED.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Let's talk about form factor. Something I've been interested in whenever I think about LEDs or the digital canvas concept is the fact that, well, for those who don't know, in general, the very large ones are put together in individual panels, right? Maybe these days those are probably 50 or 60-inch panels that get mounted all together in a uniform way. So what you see is a giant display. But that means that we're not really stuck to this world where a display is a 16 by 9 rectangle, you know, no matter what. It becomes a world where you can really build any size and any shape that you want. So I guess talk about that. Have you seen any place where that has been a killer app yet? Or is that just a dream that I have, that one day all TVs aren't rectangles?
Just look in Times Square. Almost all of those displays are non-16 by 9. That they're huge vertical aspect ratios. They go around the corners. You know, they have the parts and pieces that go here and there. This is clearly one of the big advantages of LED is you can do this mix and match kind of aspect ratio stuff. It's great.
That makes sense. There's a lot more I want to ask about. Our time's a little limited here, but we're gonna come back in the after show. Some things I want to touch on. The electronics that drive these panels. How is that different in a flat panel versus a direct view? And also, how do we supply video to a panel that large? And I mean that two ways. One is, you know, literally, what do I plug into this thing, or presumably its controller box? But then number two, how do I create content? You know, a lot of our content creation is based around 16 by 9 rectangles. So I'm curious to learn about some of the tools and techniques used, you know, to generate what you're seeing in Times Square. So sit right there. You guys stay still too, because I want to touch on all these things and your questions. Get them in live at sdvoe.org in just a couple of minutes.